A company stole my 40-hour presentation for a $2 million launch. So I nuked their national website and held it hostage for $45,000. The CEO's voice was vibrating through my phone speaker so loudly that my coffee mug rattled against the dark oak of my desk. He was screaming something about digital sabotage, federal prison, and calling the FBI, while I just sat back in my ergonomic chair, watching his company's $2 million national launch burn to the absolute ground in real time. My name is Mark. I am a veteran brand strategist, a man who has spent the last 15 years turning abstract corporate buzzwords into actual revenue. I live at 921 Juniper Lane in Oakwood Heights, a quiet neighborhood that perfectly contrasts the chaotic, high-stress world of digital marketing I navigate every single day. I know my worth. I know the exact value of my time, my eye for design, and my strategic mind. But 2 months ago, I let desperation override my instincts. I had been out of work for 5 months following a brutal round of tech layoffs. The severance was drying up, the mortgage on Juniper Lane was looming, and the daily grind of sending resumes into the automated void of job portals was eroding my sanity. That was when a recruiter reached out to me on LinkedIn regarding a VP of marketing role at a company called Apex Creative Solutions. They were an aggressive, rapidly scaling agency that had just secured funding for a massive national rollout of their new flagship service, internally dubbed Project Zenith. The salary was astronomical. The benefits were gold tier. I needed this job like I needed oxygen. Getting my foot in the door required running a grueling, multi-week gauntlet. Round 1 was a screening with HR that felt more like an interrogation. Round 2 was a brutal 2-hour technical deep dive with the hiring panel where I had to surgically dissect their previous, failing campaigns while maintaining a polite, corporate smile. I survived both. I was the front runner. I could feel the offer letter materializing in my inbox. Then came round 3 with Elias Thorne, Apex's Director of Innovation. Elias was the kind of guy who wore immaculate Patagonia fleece vests over tailored dress shirts and spoke exclusively in Silicon Valley parables. He didn't have conversations, he delivered monologues. We sat in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city, and he leaned across the table, steepling his fingers together. "Mark, we love your pedigree," Elias purred, his eyes dead and unblinking. "But for a VP role, we need to know you can truly bleed for the brand. We need a final vibe check. A proof of concept for Project Zenith. We want you to draft a launch strategy. Just something light. Show us how you'd position it in the market." My stomach tightened. My jaw clenched so hard my back teeth ached. In the creative industry, spec work is the ultimate red flag. It is the polite, corporate way of demanding free labor under the guise of an interview process. I knew it. He knew it. But the mortgage on Juniper Lane didn't care about my principles. "Define something light, Elias," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral despite the heat rising in my neck. "Just your vision," he smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "Taglines, color theory, maybe a few mock-ups. Show us you want to be here." I went home to my office, locked the door, and went to war. I didn't give them something light. I gave them a masterpiece. Over the next 4 days, I poured exactly 40 hours of blood, sweat, and sleepless, caffeine-fueled mania into that presentation. I built a fully fleshed-out, 30-page national launch strategy. I spent hours locked in the dark, my face illuminated only by the glow of my dual monitors, perfecting the psychological impact of the color theory. I custom-coded scalable vector graphics, or SVGs, to give their website a sleek, interactive edge. I rendered 3D assets that made Project Zenith look like the second coming of Apple. I wrote copy that was razor-sharp, compelling, and ready to print. It was the best work of my career. When I finally hit send on the PDF, my hands were shaking from exhaustion. I collapsed into bed, entirely convinced that I had just secured the VP position. I had handed them a golden ticket. All they had to do was hire me. 2 weeks went by. Absolute silence. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart hammered against my ribs, only to find a spam email or a text from a friend. The silence was deafening. It was a suffocating, heavy dread that settled in my chest and refused to leave. Finally, at 4:47 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, my inbox chimed. It was an email from Elias Thorne. 2 sentences. "Mark, thank you for your time and the impressive presentation. We've decided to move forward with a candidate whose vision more closely aligns with our internal culture. Best of luck." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. A cold, hollow pit opened up in my stomach. 4 40 hours. Gone. Dismissed with a copy-pasted template. I felt the heat rising in my neck, my vision going hazy with a sudden, violent surge of rage. I didn't just accept it. I needed to know who beat me. I needed to know what kind of marketing genius possessed a vision so profound that it made my 40-hour masterpiece look inadequate. I opened LinkedIn and navigated to the Apex Creative Solutions company page. I clicked on New Hires. Right at the top of the feed was a celebratory post welcoming their new VP of Marketing. His name was Chase. He was 22 years old. I scrolled through his profile, my breath turning shallow. Chase wasn't a veteran strategist. He wasn't a brand manager. He was a lifestyle vlogger. His entire work history consisted of a failed YouTube channel about sneaker unboxing and a 6-month stint as a vibe curator at a local coffee shop. But the piece of the puzzle that made my blood run cold, the detail that made my hands curl into tight fists, was his last name. He shared the exact same hyphenated last name as Apex's CEO, Richard. Chase was the CEO's nephew. I had been used. I was never a candidate for the VP role. I was an unpaid consultant brought in to generate the strategy that nepotism could not buy. They hired the kid to keep the money in the family, and they squeezed me dry to ensure the kid actually had a strategy to present to the board. I sat in the dark of my office, listening to the rain hit the window glass, and I made a promise to myself right then and there. I was going to tear them apart. For 3 weeks, I waited. I watched Apex's social media channels like a hawk. I knew the launch date for Project Zenith was approaching. I knew they were spending $2 million on influencer marketing, paid social ads, and a massive PR blitz. They were going to drive millions of eyes to their national website on launch day. This morning, at exactly 8 a.m., the campaign went live. I sat at my desk with a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed in the URL for the Apex Creative Solutions homepage and hit enter. The page loaded. I nearly dropped my ceramic mug straight onto my keyboard. It wasn't just similar to my pitch. It wasn't just inspired by my vision. It was my exact, pixel-for-pixel presentation. I stared in absolute horror and twisted fascination. They had ripped the custom taglines word for word. They had mapped my exact proprietary color theory onto their UI. But worst of all, spinning beautifully in the center of their landing page, were the 3D renders and the custom-coded SVG icons I had built from scratch in my home office. Chase, the 22-year-old sneaker vlogger, hadn't even bothered to tweak the contrast. He had just handed my presentation to the dev team and said, "Build this." That's when the real bombshell dropped. I am a veteran of this industry. I have had my work stolen by unscrupulous clients in the past, and I learned my lesson a very long time ago. When I build a presentation for a spec assignment, I do not send raw files. I embedded steganographic signatures into the deep metadata of every single image I created. If you don't know what steganography is, it's the practice of concealing hidden data within the pixel structure of a digital file. To the naked eye, it's a beautifully rendered 3D icon. To a hex editor, it's a flashing neon sign that reads, "Copyright Mark 921, Juniper Lane, unlicensed use strictly prohibited." But I didn't just watermark them. I used a ghost link system. When I sent that PDF to Elias, I didn't actually embed the heavy, high-resolution assets into the document. That would make the file too large to email. Instead, I hosted the ultra-high-res images on my own private, encrypted server tower humming quietly in the corner of my living room. The PDF simply contained preview links that fetched the images from my server every time the document was opened. I right-clicked the massive, beautiful hero banner on the live Apex homepage. I clicked Inspect Element. A panel of code slid open on the right side of my screen. I scanned the HTML tags until I found the image source. My heart skipped a beat, and a slow, wicked smile spread across my face. Chase was incompetent. He was so monumentally, astonishingly lazy that he hadn't even bothered to right-click, download, and rehost the images on Apex's corporate servers. He had just copied the image URL straight from my PDF and pasted them into the live website's code. Apex Creative Solutions, a company currently executing a $2 million national marketing launch, was hot-linking their entire visual identity directly from a private hard drive sitting next to a potted fern in my living room. I glanced at the clock on my wall. It was 9 a.m. The PR blitz was scheduled to peak at noon. Influencers were already posting. Traffic was surging. I opened the terminal on my computer and accessed the backend of my private server. I navigated to the directory labeled Apex Pitch Assets. I found the file named herobannermain.png. This was the image currently being displayed to thousands of potential customers on Apex's homepage. I didn't delete the file. That would just result in a broken image link, a minor technical glitch their devs could explain away. I wanted wanted blood. I wanted a public execution. I opened Photoshop. I pulled up a high-resolution scan of the original, dated, test assignment, contract Elias had sent me, clearly proving the work was uncompensated spec work. I adjusted the contrast to make the text pop. Then, I selected a massive, bold font. I picked a shade of red so aggressive it almost hurt to look at. I typed a single, screen-shattering phrase across the entire document. Unlicensed content, invoice pending. This company steals from independent creators. I flattened the image. I saved it as herobannermain.png. I dragged the new file into my server directory. A prompt appeared, a file with this name already exists. Do you want to replace it? I slammed the enter key. I tabbed back over to my browser. I hit refresh on the Apex homepage. The elegant, 3D, rendered glassmorphism banner vanished. In its place, stretching massively across the entire width of their $2 million launch site, was my watermarked contract screaming about intellectual property theft in blood-red letters. It was magnificent. It was the most beautiful piece of digital vandalism I had ever witnessed. But I wasn't done. Justice isn't just about embarrassment, it's about compensation. I opened my invoicing software. I drafted a formal, master services agreement, invoice. Line item 1, Project Zenith launch strategy, brand identity, and asset generation, $15,000. Line item 2, exclusivity, emergency licensing, and expedited asset delivery fee, $30,000. Total amount due, $45,000. I drafted a new email. I didn't send it to Elias Thorne. I didn't send it to Chase. I bypassed the clowns and went straight for the jugular. I CC'd the entire Apex board of directors, the CEO Richard, and the company's lead corporate counsel. The subject line read, urgent, licensing violation and pending DMCA takedown for Project Zenith. I attached the $45,000 invoice. I attached a screenshot of their live website pulling data directly from my personal drive at 921, Juniper Lane. I attached the hex editor readout proving my steganographic signatures were embedded in their source code. And I wrote a very brief message. Good morning. It appears your new VP of Marketing has launched Project Zenith using unlicensed, copyrighted assets hosted on my private residential server. I have temporarily updated the assets to reflect their unlicensed status. Attached is the invoice for the retroactive licensing of my intellectual property. Please remit payment immediately to avoid catastrophic service interruptions. I hit send. I leaned back, took a long, slow sip of my dark roast, and waited. It took exactly 10 minutes for my phone to ring. The caller ID flashed a local corporate number. I tapped the speakerphone button and let the device rest on my desk. Hello, I said, keeping my voice smooth and entirely devoid of emotion. You listen to me, you piece of shit. A voice exploded through the tiny speaker, the audio peaking and crackling with absolute fury. It was Richard, the CEO. I have my legal team in the room. I have the police on speed dial. You have exactly 3 seconds to fix our website before I have you thrown in a federal penitentiary for digital sabotage and corporate extortion. I let the silence hang for a moment. I listened to his heavy, frantic breathing. I could hear the panicked muttering of executives in the background. Richard, I whispered, keeping my voice dangerously low and razor sharp. You don't have the police on the other line. Because if you did, you'd have to explain to a detective why a multi-million-dollar corporation is actively stealing server bandwidth from a private citizen in Oakwood Heights. You didn't download my files. Your idiot nephew hot-linked them. You are currently trespassing on my digital property. You hacked our site, he screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. You broke into our mainframe. I didn't hack anything, I replied, the ice in my voice thickening. I changed a file on my own personal computer. Your website just happens to be looking at my personal computer. That's not sabotage, Richard. That's a subscription model. And you are currently using my intellectual property to run a national campaign. We'll sue you into the Stone Age, he roared. We'll bankrupt you. Listen very carefully to me, I hissed, leaning closer to the microphone, the righteous anger finally bleeding into my words. Every minute that red banner stays up is another $1,000 in service interruption fees. Furthermore, if that invoice isn't paid in full, I will file a formal DMCA takedown notice with Google, Amazon Web Services, and Instagram. Do you know what happens when a copyright bot receives a cryptographically proven DMCA claim against a domain? They don't investigate. They don't ask for your side of the story. They nuke the site from orbit. Your entire $2 million launch will be blacklisted from the Internet Index before lunch. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Someone in the background, presumably the lead counsel, was urgently whispering into Richard's ear. I could hear snippets of the lawyer's panicked voice. He's right, Richard, the metadata, the hot link, we have no defense. I suggest you pay the invoice, Richard, I said, twisting the knife. Before the hundreds of influencers you paid start tagging a website that publicly calls you a thief. You have until 11:30 a.m. After that, the DMCA goes out, and I replaced the hero banner with a compilation of your nephew's failed sneaker unboxing videos. I ended the call. I didn't wait for his response. I just cut the line, plunging my office back into a tense, vibrating silence. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I sat at my desk, watching the live analytics on my server. Thousands of requests were pouring in every second as people across the country navigated to the Apex site and were immediately greeted by my glowing red ransom note. Twitter was already starting to notice. A few industry watchdogs had taken screenshots and were asking questions. The pressure on Apex was mounting exponentially with every passing second. At 10:15 a.m., I received an email from Elias Thorne. It was a frantic, groveling mess begging me to take the image down while they processed the paperwork. I deleted it without reading the second paragraph. At 10:45 a.m., my server logged a massive spike in traffic. They were desperately trying to strip the hot links out of their code, but because Chase had hard-coded my URLs into the core styling architecture of the site, removing them broke the entire visual framework. The site devolved into a chaotic mess of broken CSS and unformatted text. They were trapped. At 11:28 a.m., 2 minutes before my deadline, my phone chimed with a notification from my banking app. It was an incoming wire transfer alert. Incoming amount, $45,000. Sender, Apex Creative Solutions. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 2 months. The tension drained from my shoulders, replaced by a surging, electric wave of pure vindication. They broke. The corporate giants with their millions in funding and their smug nepotism had completely folded to a guy sitting in his living room on Juniper Lane. I opened my server terminal, renamed the red watermark image, and restored the original, pristine hero banner to the directory. Within seconds, the Apex website refreshed, pulling the correct assets. The crisis was averted for them, but the damage to their ego and their bottom line was absolute. But I am a strategist. I don't just win battles, I salt the earth so nothing can ever grow there again. As I watched the $45,000 clear into my available balance, I realized something beautiful. During my grueling interview process, Apex Creative Solutions had never asked me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. In their arrogant minds, candidates were just desperate peasants begging for scraps. Why would they waste legal fees drafting an NDA for someone they were just going to steal from anyway? Because they didn't force me to sign an NDA, I was legally entirely free to discuss the strategy one had developed. It was my brainchild, and I was not bound by confidentiality. I opened my email client one last time. I created a zip file containing my original 30-page PDF, the timeline of the theft, screenshots of the red watermark on their live site, and a redacted copy of the $45,000 wire transfer proving they had just admitted guilt. I addressed the email to the Chief Marketing Officer of Lumina Brands, Apex Creative Solutions' largest, most aggressive, and heavily funded competitor. The subject line was simple: a gift from Juniper Lane, the complete architecture of Apex's Project Zenith. I hit send, closed my laptop, and finally walked away from my desk. Within a week, the fallout was spectacular. Lumina Brands didn't just use my intel, they weaponized it. They launched a targeted, savage parody ad campaign that directly mocked Project Zenith's core messaging, the exact messaging I had written, and that Apex was currently spending millions to promote. Lumina anticipated every single move Apex made because they literally had the playbook I wrote. They bought ad space directly next to Apex's billboards. They hijacked Apex's trending hashtags. They made the $2 million launch look like an amateur, high school marketing project thrown together at the last minute by a clueless kid. Which, ironically, it was. Chase was quietly removed from his position as VP of Marketing within the month, his LinkedIn mysteriously vanishing from the internet. Elias Thorne was let go to pursue other opportunities. And I sat on my back porch on Juniper Lane, drinking a very expensive cup of coffee, completely debt-free, watching a corporate empire crumble under the weight of its own stolen hubris. So, I'll leave it to you to decide. I nuked a multi-million-dollar campaign, held a company's entire digital presence hostage, and gleefully handed their deepest secrets to their worst enemy. Am I the monster here, or did they get exactly what they deserved?
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.